yeah, so sales. There's two different ways that these businesses can be registered. They're either at the city level or they're at the county level. If the city takes registration, it will have more control over the process. You take an application in, you get a fee, you can restrict to a certain number of locations. You have to do enforcement, so there are staff resources involved, so that's the con. The pro is you have more control. If the county registers businesses, they take the applications in, they do the background checks, they do the enforcement, but the city very likely won't have nearly as much control in terms of the number of licenses granted in the community. So there's definitely a give and take with these. Staff's recommendation thus far has been, or thought has been, to have the county do the licensing, simply because it would create a kind of a strain on staff resources to be able to register these businesses and do the background checks and things of that nature. So that's kind of where staff's recommendation is right now, but of course, that's definitely something that can be discussed by the city council in terms of the direction you'd like to go. So if you are a city that registers retail operations, you can limit them, but you cannot limit them beyond one retail location per 12,500 residents. So in Lake Elmo, that means if you register, you have to allow at least two businesses.
So we could have restrictions by ordinance on the number of them, their location, hours of operation, things like that, but let the county do the licensing?
So yeah, you can restrict the location, hours of operation, like most of the things you said here, and the only thing you couldn't restrict is the number of locations. At this time, we're working with the city attorney to better understand that, because it's a little confusing. But at this time, what I would tell you is the only thing we can't control is the number of registered retail locations, if we give it to the county. If we register in-house, then we have the ability to control.
So, but even if it went to the county, they could have more than two licenses in Lake Elmo?
Yeah, so if the county, and if we're talking I'll call it like a worst case scenario, if you want to just bear with me on that, for lack of a better term. Let's say the city decides to have the county register businesses. The city would be would still ensure that all businesses are compliant with its standards, which means that they're only in the locations that you say they can be, and with the standards that you say they have to have, but you could not limit the number. Functionally, how many businesses do you get when you only have a certain number of properties? I don't know, you get a ton, but I mean, that's definitely part of the conversation.
Was there also something in that number of businesses that related to, based on population, let's say, let's use Woodbury as an example.
Yeah.
Let's say they allowed more than the number per 12,500. And that used a certain value within the county. Are some cities able to say, well, they have enough to cover our population too, so
we don't need to allow any.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm actually following up on that very question with the city attorney. My understanding up until now has been, if we register in-house, then we have to do at least two businesses.
Okay.
If we allow the county to register, they might have some type of system and determination of how many they want to register countywide.
Okay.
That would include Lake Elmo's population and whatever other cities that are, deferring to the county in registration. Right. I also think that if Woodbury, in this case, registers its own businesses, and I think they are, their population of 80,000 gets removed from that total pool of people in the county. So I think we need to understand that a little bit better, and we're certainly working on that now. I think tonight, if you would be able to discuss and maybe provide some preliminary feedback on the direction and what questions you have about registration or not, really that would be helpful to staff, so we can get these things addressed.
So if we're the agents for registration, we can charge a fee to cover our cost?
Up to the amount that's allowed by statute.
Up to, okay.
I don't know what it is off the top. Yep.
And when we're talking a business, so one per 12.5, is that one of any type of the business, cannabis businesses?
Just a retail business.
Just a retail business.
So it could be a retailer, cannabis retailer, it could be a mezzo business with a
Anybody
retail
who does
endorsement.
retail sales?
Yes.
Of those?
Yep.
But what about the other types of businesses?
You cannot limit them. You can only limit them through your zoning.
All right.
So what is the amount in statute for you can charge for the regulation function? Do you know what it is?
We're looking at something on the order of magnitude of like a few $100s.
$200?
To $1,000.
Oh,
So the fees are not exorbitant, and I think the statute there was intent behind that.
I think it's probably similar to the costs that you incur by staff and resources, right?
Yep. Yep, and I think,
Still, so if you incurred more costs, you couldn't collect above the statutory limit.
I think there might be a ability for cities to, if they've shown how much it takes to administer this,
Yeah.
there may be a process to charge more than the state statute, but there are thresholds or limits basically put in the statute.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about a relatively low sum for a business. Yep.
Just a question about how the cannabis businesses relate to liquor businesses.
Yeah.
I was trying to find something in the documentation, because I thought at one point in the process, you weren't allowed to have liquor and cannabis products. But is that the case now? Or
Oh, yeah.
if our liquor store in town here wants to now sell cannabis, wants to be a retailer, is that allowed in the
That is a good
legislation?
question.
Or a restaurant or a bar that wants to be a, I don't know, what was the
Off-sale.
name, like the
Off-sale.
microbrewery or
Oh, yeah.
where you can use it on site. Are those allowable? And do we need to consider or factor that into our ordinance at all?
Those are a lot of good questions. I guess I would start with, can we combine a liquor and a THC business? I am not aware of anything in the statute with cannabis that would limit that, but I don't know if Julie or anyone else is knowledgeable about any other restrictions for liquor licenses.
I'm not aware of anything. Oh, yeah.
I think
there-
that might roll into the security that's required.
Yeah, and so that's a good point.
Sale.
So statute is going to establish basically minimum standards as well for the internal operation. And so I wonder if like in an instance where it's in like the same building, like a liquor store and a cannabis, I wonder if they don't get cordoned off somehow, and that's how it's allowed. But in the draft ordinance, we don't have any restrictions on that, although I think we might be able to do something like that if the city council were to do that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not saying one way or the other that we should have a restriction on that, but I mean, I think it's just a factor in this, a question that may come up, and I don't know that any businesses, existing businesses are interested in pursuing that, but if they were, I mean, some of those are like our village area where we have restaurants and liquor store, and again, does that need to be factored into our ordinance at all? And are we okay if we don't allow it there, I guess?
One question I didn't address was the like food and like micro business
Yeah.
model. I don't think that's limited in statute. I think you can do that as long as you have a license for both businesses. And I think you do need a license to the state for a restaurant.
Okay. All right.
All right. I'm gonna keep things moving here unless there's more questions. Feel free to jump in if there are. So we're talking a little bit about these performance standards. I think I ended on this registration slide. So just to make sure that we've talked through this one more, cities with a municipal store. So the statute allows for a municipal sale model. I'm not sure that Lake Elmo has any interest in that, but that is something that is allowed in statute. The city cannot limit the registration of low-potency hemp retail uses. That is important. It's not a cannabis retailer, it's a separate business, and so they're not plate.
Can you put that in the same category with relationship to, distance restrictions and things of that nature?
I don't think that they are subject to the buffer standards.
Okay.
Yep. And those businesses have already been in operation in a lot of areas that don't have that buffer, so
Right.
in other communities, it's definitely gonna be an issue. All right, just to make sure that we've talked through these registration items again. So the OCM is that exclusive licensing entity. They issue the licenses, but the city can register if it chooses. So really, we've kind of talked about the pros and cons here. The main question is, should the city undertake registration or look to the county? So the recommendations from staff are, number one, to add definitions specific to these cannabis businesses and hemp businesses and their operations, and those things are included in the draft ordinance. Also, we would like to determine where those uses should be permitted and how. So really looking at CUPs as the primary way that these businesses get approved. That gives us the ability to look at them closely. And lastly, we need to determine those performance standards, and the draft zoning ordinance in front of you does those things, and of course can be modified to kind of suit how the city would like to regulate. Specific to the ordinance, it would need to be modified to outline a registration process if that was the direction the city wanted to go, or we would create a separate ordinance with that process in it. We will need to establish fees related to registration if we choose to do that, and also be careful about making sure we cross-reference the standards in the zoning. So before we go to these discussion questions, I'm gonna zoom to the timeline that we're on before we dive in. Obviously, tonight is our discussion at the joint meeting. On the 25th of November, we will have a public hearing at the Planning Commission, so we'll be discussing this amendment to the city code not too long from now, and then bringing it to the city council on December 3rd, hopefully for a review and decision, but if we need more time, we certainly do have an extra meeting, so we can do that before the first of the year. So with that, I'll leave you with the discussion questions, and then we can just kind of do whatever the council likes. I have them listed on the screen. Really, first and foremost, do we want to register cannabis businesses or look to Washington County? Are there concerns about specific cannabis businesses, and if there are, what might those be?
Well, I think-
And then, yep.
For me, the hard one on number one is, I know it would be an extra task for city staff to do that, but based on having no experience in that, we don't know what that time would be for city staff. And I'm just not a big fan of saying, here you go, Washington County, you be the gatekeeper. And maybe it's unnecessary concern, but it's certainly something that sticks in my head. And I'm not looking to put more things on staff's plate, but I guess not knowing what it takes, it kind of makes it hard to make that call.
I'm kind of with you, Mayor. I think our ability to limit the number of businesses within a city overrides any cost concerns. Not that I'm not sensitive to cost concerns, but looking at the statute, you can charge a fee of up to $500 or half of the amount in another section that the state charges. So it's whatever less. So, you know, it's not a big fee, but we don't know what the process involved would be. But I think we're better off to bite the bullet on $1,000 in cost as opposed to not having control over how many businesses we have, you know, in our city.
So, and my question, I guess, when we say cannabis businesses, these are all the different types of cannabis businesses, right?
So, yeah, just to be very clear, if we register, we are only able to control the retail uses.
And my point is, once you hit the two, there's no additional staff load because
Yep.
you can't allow any more businesses automatically rejected.
Retail, yeah.
Yeah.
But so would the county, in addition to the retail businesses, also do the micro and no, we'd still be responsible for those as regular businesses.
Yeah, so they're gonna go through a registration, so the license process for, let's just use processing, because that one's not a retail component. It doesn't have a retail component. If a processing business wanted to open up shop here in the city of Lake Elmo, they would simply apply to the state, the OCM. The OCM would check in with us, as I mentioned, to say, hey, do they have a zoning verification? Are they allowed to do this on that property? If they're on a business park property, for example, we would say they need a CUP. Pending the CUP, they could potentially take,
Okay.
start their business, and there would be no registration process for that particular business.
Right.
So it's, again, just those those businesses that do retail.
Correct.
Those are the only ones that we would be able to control.
So,
But
yeah,
that
and-
would be,
Quantity on it.
so what you just mentioned, that would be the process regardless if we gave control over to the county
correct,
for cannabis businesses.
Correct.
Retail. We'd still have to handle the question of if the zoning and go through CUP.
Yep.
For the
that's not going anywhere.
processing or
Yep,
whatever, okay.
correct.
Well, for me then, I guess I would prefer us to have control of that to two businesses rather than Washington County say, well, they've got room out there and Woodbury's taking care of their own and don't really want it downtown Stillwater, so going here, downtown Bayport, or wherever, right? So I think it probably behooves us to have a little
Hands on the wheel.
hesitation there, yeah.
I agree. I think having local control, at least to start with, and we may learn some things through this that low risk to go and have the county do it eventually, but I think we should start with controlling that right up front so we understand what's happening and what that process looks like and have that local control.
That's kind of where I sit on that as well.
I agree.
Well, you brought up a good point. It's a good starting point, because we can always change, can't we?
Absolutely.
If it doesn't
Yep.
work, that was a good
Yeah.
point. If it
Right.
doesn't work, we can always. And did I misunderstand? Were there only so many allowed in the county?
So, so really it's, again, going back to that retail component,
Right.
the county or the city would be subject to that ratio of having to require, or at least allow, one retail business for every 12,500
Even if
residents.
there was 50 in the county, we'd still have to have one for every 12,500?
Yes, that's our understanding right now.
That's where I was
Yep.
confused. Okay,
Yep.
thank
So
you.
let's say there's 100 businesses in
Yep.
the county, and
We still have to have
there's still-
ours.
Yeah, we still have to
Gotcha.
have ours too,
Thank you.
in this case.
Jason, if we take this on, you don't need more than 4 hours of sleep in any night, do you?
Yeah, I think this would be good. I mean, one of the concerns too is it's gonna be business driven, so the communities to the east, if the county were to regulate it and license it, they may not even locate in those towns, right? And they may wanna locate here. So we think demand, we're already asking about, 94 corridor, what's going on with, are people developing that area? It seems like a great place to put these retailers, people coming from Wisconsin,
Right.
so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you talk buffers, Nathan, 1,000 for school, 500 for the others, could you make them all 1,000 and just
No.
be consistent?
You cannot get more restrictive than statute.
Okay,
Yep,
but we can get more restrictive than statute in other ways.
correct. I would really hone in if I'm gonna be looking to get more restrictive on those design standards.
Okay,
Yep, or performance standards, maybe we could call them,
yeah.
so.
And when you talk about concern about specific cannabis businesses, Nathan, I mean, really all we can control so far is number of retail. Everything else is allowable per the state, and as long as it meets zoning
Right.
requirements, which we're talking about business park, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I don't, yeah,
When I think about concerns, someone you might have right away, it's, what if we get cannabis processor, and, what do we worry about with that? We worry about the smell.
I think, yeah, some of the ordinances that we put in, at least for stuff is really pungent if it's not controlled, so whether they, however they, like you said, have word's escaping.
Industrial hygienist.
Industrial
Yeah.
hygienists come in and explain how they're gonna use carbon filters or whatever purifiers to make sure that that stink doesn't hit their neighbor, the neighborhood that's, if the wind shifts, that they're gonna smell it, 1,000 feet away.
Right, and just for the council and commission, I mean, I think with CUPs, you know well that you can approve, or, they're intentionally allowed in the community, but the city can place those reasonable conditions. And so when we've got a particular thing that we're worried about, if it's smell, we have a pretty clear ability to apply that condition. In this case, we're starting with, I would say, a fairly restrictive standard, or at least very clear standard of no odor at the property boundary. And then how they accomplish that is definitely up to the business. And so it might be that
Create
Right.
specifications, not means and methods.
Would growing it in a greenhouse limit that odor, since it's be inside?
I might limit the scale of the use. I don't know if it would limit the odor.
Houses are pretty vented.
Probably advantage, yeah. I was saying, and if it's in a greenhouse, would they have multiple layers of plants, so the footprint would be reduced? My concern is if you allow them to be, if we ban greenhouses, then, we're gonna have more land used up for cultivation, should they decide to locate here. If in the greenhouse they have multiple levels,
It's limited to so many
So
square feet, right?
So what we've actually proposed in the ordinance is not to allow cultivation outside. So we would only allow cultivation in a building. We could get more specific, and that's one of the questions I had in here, is should we just say no greenhouses and just basically a lot of the growing facilities actually have that appearance of like an Amazon fulfillment center. They're just an industrial building where they have the multiple rows and really high use of energy and water.
so we can ban the greenhouse, so they can still grow them in buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grow lights and stuff.
Okay, I was just thinking greenhouse is, just something you grow plants inside of.
They're a huge energy user.
Yeah, okay. So it could be brown houses or green, or yellow houses, but they can't be greenhouses.
Right. Could be a green building.
Nathan, I have a question about the cannabinoid or the low potency hemp stuff. So the city of Lake Elmo hasn't discussed that at all yet? So, is that correct?
Correct.
So
At
then-
least, yep.
So then the liquor stores could currently carry the THC beverages, or the restaurants could currently have it on tap if we don't have any regulations against it?
Yeah, so I think we are
I thought we
proposing,
addressed that, did we?
Well, I think
Wasn't that
there is
when
a
we talked about the
restaurant,
park?
there's some restaurants, I don't think you'll ever see it on tap, because it's not very regulated.
but the
that way,
cans for
but
sale,
They
right?
sell the cans at some places, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
So we do have the sales business accounted for, at least for the retail, that customer-facing retail side of it, but I don't know that we've necessarily got the sales at the bar in this one, so that would be something that we probably have to look at a little further.
okay, and then the edibles too, okay. Wow, all right.
We just asked the question, if that were something that were prohibited, does the council or commission think that would be a problem in the community with non-conformance?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you
So
completely.
if we were to like just basically ban sales at like bars or whatever of low potency hemp products,
Oh,
would that cause an issue for existing businesses?
I think there's some businesses that
Probably.
have it currently, so.
I don't know why I guess, this is where I struggle a little bit with cannabis versus alcohol. And putting so many regulations around cannabis. I don't know.
Kind of like 3-2 beer?
Kind of,
All right.
Sure.
It's an analogy that might not help me put in perspective.
so the serving size, to use that analogy, is what's limited, right? It's 5 milligrams per serving, and so you've got typically a lower potency product.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let me go back to the questions here. So the discussion so far has been helpful. We will definitely be looking at the registration process and, given the guidance here received this evening, likely be coming up with a draft registration ordinance for the council as well, and that could be considered by the planning commission at their meeting. It seems like we, through our performance standards, have addressed some of the primary concerns that the community might have. Looking at those buffers, it seems that the council and commission are interested in keeping those in the ordinance. I'm wondering if you're interested in keeping all of them for now, perhaps? Getting a couple head nods.
I'd say yes.
I don't know why you wouldn't.
I think I'd like to, that the discussion question 5 is about adding cannabis testing facilities to the list of uses. I think this would be wise to do, so I just suggest that we move forward and do that, just so that we've defined the use and regulated it accordingly. And lastly, we do have standards created for those temporary cannabis events. Again, really the primary thing is not allowing them anywhere but a licensed, or sorry, a cannabis business that's got a CUP in the community.
And they still have to be held inside and meet the
Correct.
smell and all that stuff.
Correct. So my analogy to beer dabbler wasn't totally accurate.
Yeah. It was-
You were worried, weren't you?
I was. And just in this draft copy, so item D, the temporary cannabis events, you need to clean that up.
Yep, I see there were a couple typos that I noticed today, so I appreciate that. That'll get fixed.
All
As I
right.
look at staff, if there's any other questions that staff has that I've not touched.
Not gonna be mad at us, are you, if we control that by the city? All
Perfectly
right,
fine.
okay.
I thought the draft ordinance was pretty complete, by the way. I
Yeah.
looked through it in very detail, and
Yeah.
the only trick was going back with the LC and the CCs and all that, I got to go back to, okay, what's that? But I thought the restrictions you placed made sense to me.
Okay.
By zoning district.
Yeah.
And, yeah, like the mayor, I think controlling it would be important from my perspective. But I thought the draft ordinance was pretty complete. I know we have a few questions here, but generally speaking, it was a very nice job. My compliments to the staff.
Yep.
Appreciate the guidance this evening.
Yeah, agreed. That was,
Nathan, I think when you guys at least present to planning commission that we show the map, highlight those areas that are meeting where it could be.
Yep,
The circles can be ambiguous, but I think that will allow us a little more direction to give a recommendation to council.
got it. I guess a follow-up question is, is there any other information that you'd like us to bring to future meetings at either the planning commission or city council? Other than, I've got registration and low potency hemp edible questions.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question, I think that got clarified for me was really the only thing that we can control beyond where it can be and lighting and parking and all that stuff is the number of retail that we have in our city. Other than that, I mean, if they meet regular stuff, the mezzo business, they can, regardless of what the city says, they're allowed to be there, which is kind of news to me, but.
That's the way I understand it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
And, I think that ends our PDF isn't pulling up for me.
Yeah, that is our agenda.
I had it all printed out at work yesterday.
That's it.
Did we have anything on there to show what's coming up in the next workshop? No? All right, with that, then we will adjourn this evening's city council workshop at 7:27. Thank you.
That's for